Chat Club. This month, since it's February, and when we think about February, we think a lot of times about love. But instead of talking about love, I want to talk to you about another word. It's called compassion. What does it mean to have compassion for somebody else? This is how I would define compassion. Compassion is caring enough to do something about someone else's need. Caring enough to do something about somebody else's need. So let's talk about that. First, I have a question for you. Have you ever heard about a rescue story where someone uses something completely unexpected to do something pretty amazing to help someone? Well, I don't know if you thought of anything, but I have a story for you that I recently read. Back in 2016, this happened to a woman named Susan Robbins. She was driving along and her car slid on some ice on a New Hampshire highway. Her car crashed and she was left unconscious. Even worse, her car's engine compartment started to catch on fire. People driving by were willing to call 911 because they're like, hey, I got a phone, I can call 911. But with the fire blazing and threatening Robin's life, no one was willing to really step out and do anything. But that's when Mark stopped on the side of the road and he sprang into action to put out the fire. First, he tried to put out the fire using just some spare clothing he had by slapping the fire, but he couldn't reach the flames. So he created a homemade fire extinguisher with what he had in his truck. You know what he used? A 2-liter bottle of Coke. He shook that thing and shook that thing and shook that thing so that when he uncorked the cap on it and sprayed it, it was like a foam spray that went all over her car, and you know what? It worked. He was able to put out the fire and save Robin's life until help was able to arrive to rescue her. Pretty awesome. Who would have thought of using a 2-liter bottle of Coke to be the fire extinguisher? That's something pretty random but incredibly resourceful. So you might be asking, well, why did I share this really random story with you? Sure, it's cool, but what does a 2-liter bottle of soda have to do with anything we're talking about, and especially what does it have to do with compassion? So here's the thing. We might never extinguish a car using a bottle of soda, but let's be honest. That could have ended pretty badly had he not sprung into action. Had he not had some compassion to use what he had in order to help somebody else's need. We're going to have times in our lives when we will face situations where somebody needs help. We might look at that situation and want to help, but not really know where to start. Or it might even feel like it's so hard that we just want to give up and not even try. What if we got creative, though, and realized that what we have is exactly what someone else needs that could make a huge difference in their life? That's exactly where we're going to jump into our story out of God's Word, the Bible, today. This is going to come from the book of John, and it's one of the 4 Gospels that tell about Jesus' birth, life, ministry, death, and resurrection. All right, so when we get into this story, you are going to realize that a lot of times in the Gospels, we find that there's a crowd of people following Jesus, always around Jesus. He's famous. Some people are following him because they truly are seeking after him and they want to follow him. Some people are following him just because they want to see the next amazing, miraculous sign that he's going to do. And some people are following him because they want to trap him, try to get him to do something that's going to get him in trouble because they don't like what he's doing and they don't like what he's saying. So that's where we're going to pick up in our story today in John chapter 6. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far side of the Sea of Galilee, what is the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the miraculous signs he had performed on the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. So Jesus has been around crowds for a long time, right? And he's like, I just want to get away. I want to go up on this mountainside. I just want to hang out with my buddies, the disciples. I just want to talk with them, debrief with them, chat with them. How are they doing? And just pour into them. But let's find out what happens. When Jesus looked up, he saw a great crowd coming toward him. So here Jesus gets in a boat, heads across the sea, gets away with his disciples. They're on the mountainside. They're having a chat. When this crowd, guess what? The crowd could not fit in that boat. this crowd walks all the way around the sea to get to Jesus. So it took a little longer, but they still got there. Jesus sees them coming, and I love his response. This is what he says. He sees them, and instead of being like, what I would be like, oh my goodness, these people will not stop following me. Please just give me a break. Instead, he's like, where can we buy enough bread so we can feed these people? That's what he's thinking. How can we feed these people? He asks one of his disciples, and the cool thing is he already had in mind exactly what he was going to do. But I love how he involves the disciples in this. So Philip, one of the disciples, says to him, Jesus, it would take 8 months worth of wages to buy enough food to feed everybody one bite of bread. Wow. Okay, either these people were going to take little tiny bites of food, or this was a really big crowd of people, that it was going to take 8 months worth of wages to give them even just one bite of bread. He's like, this is impossible. We can't feed these people. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon, Peter's brother, spoke up, and he says, get this, oh, here is a boy that has 5 small loaves of bread and 2 small fish. But how far is that going to get us among so many? Now, we don't know where this little boy came from. I don't know if he overheard the disciples and Jesus talking and he was like, hey, I have some food. You guys can have it. Or if Andrew searched him out and was like, oh, hey, can I have that food? And the little boy just gave it to them. But either way, that little boy with his little lunch is going to play a huge role in this story because he was willing to give up, have some compassion, meet a need when he was asked, or we don't know, he might have just offered it without being asked. So Jesus says, have the people sit down. So they all sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place, and the men sat down, about 5,000 of them. 5,000. Okay, so think about how many kids are in your school. A couple of thousand. Now multiply that by 2.5, or by double that, plus another half a time here. And that was only the men. That didn't include how many women and children there might have been sitting there. So there's some estimates that actually say there could have been as many as 10,000 people that were following him, sitting in this crowd, now ready to be fed by Jesus. So cool. Jesus then took the loaves, he gave thanks, and he distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. So he breaks the bread, and the bread just keeps coming and coming and coming, and the people eat and eat until they've had as much as they what? As much as they wanted, until they were full. He did the same with the fish. And when they had had enough to eat, he said to the disciples, gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted. I love that. I love that Jesus doesn't waste anything. I mean, he can create anything and he can do anything, and yet he doesn't waste what he's used. Doesn't want us, that's a good word for us too, doesn't want us to waste what he's given us to use either. So they gathered them, and they filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. Leftovers. 12 baskets left over. They ate till they were full, and then there was leftovers. What a great story. I love that there is 2 ways that compassion are shown in this story. First, we see the compassion of Jesus for these people that have been following him, and even though there were so many and it would have seemed like such an impossible task to feed them, he's like, nothing is impossible for me. If you just have some compassion and you want to meet people's needs, I will work through you to do awesome things. And I love that there's a compassion of this little boy that's like, hey, I don't have much, but I'm totally willing to give what I have. You can use it. Jesus, you can take it and you can multiply it and you can use it to impact somebody's life. And so that's my question for you today. I am asking you, what do you have that you can use to help others? You might feel like, I don't have that much. Guess what? The little boy didn't have that much either. But if you offer it to God and you give it humbly, he can do amazing things with it in somebody else's life. You just need to have a little compassion. You need to care enough to do something about somebody else's need. So I have some pictures here that I want to show you really quick. And I want you to think about what you would do. What would you do to meet this need? So, what if you were passing by a playground, passing by somebody on your school, and you saw them crying? Would you just keep walking? What do you have to offer that person that's crying, that's in need? Can you have some compassion for what they're going through? Okay, what about this picture? Somebody is looking for something. I mean, how many times do we lose something? We see somebody looking. Your parent is frantically running around looking for something. Do you pause to have some compassion? Do you think about what you could do to help? What could you do to help right now? I bet you know. What about here? What about you're off having a great lunch with your friends? You got your group of friends. You're laughing and having an awesome time. You see somebody with nobody. Somebody alone. I've seen it. I've literally walked around South Medford High School before and seen students literally eating by themselves. Breaks my heart. What can you do? Do you have something you can offer in that situation? How about this? Somebody has a deflated basketball. Simple thing. What could you do? Is there something you could do about that? Could you inflate that basketball? Could you help out that kid? Could you get him a new basketball? What could you do? What about this? You see this happen in your school all the time. One kid yelling at another kid. Is there anything you can do? Do you just walk on by? Or do you do something about it? Do you have some compassion? Those are just some really practical scenarios that I know you guys are running into. Maybe not the ball one as much, but those other ones for sure. What do you have to offer? How can you show some compassion? How can you ask God to open your eyes to see somebody else's need around you and ask that God would use you to meet that need? So let's grow some compassion together this month.